The streets of New York City glistened with the early hints of Christmas. The store windows decked out in festive displays, street vendors selling hot cocoa to passersby, and the iconic Rockefeller Christmas tree glowing in the distance. Yet for Sarah Thompson, the holiday cheer was nothing more than background noise, a distant hum she had long since learned to tune out. Sarah was in her element, striding through her sleek office in her designer heels, her mind racing with a million to-do lists. An interior designer who had quickly risen through the ranks, Sarah thrived in the high-paced, no-nonsense world of New York's corporate elite. Her latest project, a multi-million-dollar redesign for a luxury hotel, was set to launch right after Christmas, and she was pouring every ounce of her energy into making it perfect. The only problem was that Christmas had become just another deadline. "Sarah, are you coming to the office holiday party tonight?" her assistant asked, poking her head into the office. Sarah barely looked up from her laptop, her fingers flying across the keys as she typed out another urgent email. "No, I'll be working late. Tell them to enjoy it without me." Her assistant nodded with a faint smile and retreated, leaving Sarah alone with her work and the dim glow of her desk lamp. She let out a small sigh, pausing for a moment to rub her temples. There was always more work to do, more clients to impress, more milestones to achieve. The fast-paced city had consumed her, leaving little room for anything else. It wasn't that Sarah didn't enjoy her success. She had worked tirelessly to get where she was, and the rewards were tangible. The posh apartment overlooking Central Park, the professional accolades, the financial security. But as Christmas approached, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. In fact, she had felt it for years, though she tried her best to ignore it. On her way home from the office that evening, she passed the bustling Christmas markets. Couples walked hand in hand, children's faces lit up with wonder, and families gathered around the various stalls, sipping mulled cider and laughing together. Sarah watched from a distance, an outsider looking in on the warmth and joy of the season. As she reached her building, her phone buzzed. A message from her father, the first in months. "Dad, hi sweetheart, we miss you. Any chance you'll make it home for Christmas this year?" She stared at the message, her chest tightening with guilt. It had been years since she had gone back to Evergreen, her small hometown nestled in the snowy mountains. She had left for college and then jumped straight into her career in New York, never looking back. The holidays had always been an excuse to catch up on work, avoid the emotional complexities of family, and escape the small-town life she had once known. But as she climbed the steps to her apartment, something tugged at her. A faint memory of Christmases past, snowball fights with her brother, decorating the tree with her mother, and, of course, long winter walks with Jake Matthews. Jake! The thought of him sent a ripple through her, a pang of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Jake had been her high school sweetheart, the boy she once thought she'd marry. But when Sarah left for college, their lives drifted apart. Jake had stayed in Evergreen, choosing the simple life, running his family's woodshop and embracing the quiet charm of small-town living. Meanwhile, Sarah had chased her dreams of the big city, leaving behind everything, including Jake. She had tried not to think about him over the years. It was easier that way, but every now and then, especially around Christmas, memories of him would surface like snowflakes on the wind, brief, delicate, and impossible to catch. The following morning, as Sarah sipped her coffee and prepared for yet another day of back-to-back meetings, her phone rang. It was her father. She hesitated, knowing that every call from him came with the weight of expectations she wasn't sure she could meet. "Hi, Dad," she answered, try to sound cheerful. "Sarah, honey, we need to talk. Your mother isn't doing well." Those words hit her like a punch to the gut. Her mother. She had been aware of her mother's health issues, little things that her father had mentioned in passing during their sporadic phone calls. But hearing it like this, so direct and urgent, made it all too real. "She's been asking for you, Sarah," her father continued, his voice thick with emotion. "We really want you to come home for Christmas. I know you're busy, but..." Sarah closed her eyes, guilt flooding her. She hadn't been home in years. She had let her career take precedence over everything, convincing herself that she was doing it for the right reasons, for success, for security, for herself. But now, with her mother's health in question, She couldn't help but feel like she had been running away from the things that truly mattered. "I'll come," she said softly, surprising even herself. "I'll be there for Christmas." After hanging up, she stared out the window, the city's skyline stretching out before her. The thought of going back to Evergreen felt overwhelming. There were too many memories, too many unresolved emotions. But her mother needed her, and that was something she couldn't ignore. Still, a part of her dreaded the idea of facing her past, especially if it meant seeing Jake again. Packing for Evergreen felt strange. She hadn't been back in so long that she barely remembered what to bring. New York had become her world, and her suitcase reflected that: stylish clothes, high heels, and work essentials. It was only when she tucked in a scarf her mother had knitted for her years ago that the reality of returning home truly hit her. The flight was a blur of thoughts and emotions. She spent most of the time staring out the window, watching as the city below gave way to vast stretches of snowy mountains. As the plane descended into Evergreen's small airport, Sarah felt her heart rate quicken. It was strange how a place she had once known so well could now feel so foreign. Her father was waiting for her at the airport, his face lighting up when he saw her. He wrapped her in a warm hug, and for a moment, all the distance between them seemed to melt away. "It's good to see you, Sarah. Your mother will be so happy." Driving through Evergreen was like stepping back in time. The town hadn't changed much. The same quaint shops lined the main street. Christmas lights twinkled in every window, and the snow-covered town square looked like something out of a postcard. Sarah had forgotten how beautiful it all was, but her heart tightened as they passed the woodshop. Jake's woodshop. She caught a glimpse of the familiar sign, Matthew's Woodcraft, hanging above the door. A surge of emotions rushed through her: nostalgia, regret, and something else she couldn't quite name. Stepping into her childhood home felt like walking into a time capsule. The warm scent of cinnamon and pine greeted her, just like it had every Christmas growing up. Her mother was resting on the couch, her face pale, but her smile bright when she saw Sarah. "Sarah, honey," her mother said weakly, reaching out to her. "You're here." Sarah knelt by her mother's side, taking her hand. "I'm here, Mom. I'm so sorry it took me so long." Her mother shook her head, brushing off the apology with a gentle wave of her hand. "You're here now, and that's all that matters." As the days passed, Sarah slipped back into the rhythm of small-town life. She helped her father decorate the house for Christmas, baked cookies with her mother, and even attended the town's Christmas tree lighting ceremony. It was all so different from her fast-paced life in New York, and yet something about it felt right. Peaceful, but there was still a nagging feeling in the back of her mind, a sense of unfinished business. And that business had a name: Jake. It wasn't long before fate intervened. One snowy afternoon, Sarah decided to take a walk through town, wanting to clear her head. She stopped by the local cafe for a hot chocolate, and as she turned to leave, she nearly collided with someone. "Sorry, she froze, her words catching in her throat as she looked up into the familiar blue eyes of Jake Matthews. "Sarah," Jake said, his voice soft but surprised. His gaze held hers for a moment, as if he was trying to figure out if she was really standing in front of him. "Jake," she managed to say, her heart pounding in her chest. I didn't expect to see you." Jake gave a small smile, though there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. "Well, it's a small town, hard to avoid people." The air between them felt thick with unspoken words, the weight of their shared history hanging in the balance. Sarah had imagined this moment countless times, but now that it was happening, she didn't know what to say. "How have you been?" she asked, her voice tentative. Jake shrugged, his hands tucked into the pockets of his coat. "You know, same old. The shop's still running. Life's good." There was a pause, and Sarah felt a pang of guilt. She had left, chasing her dreams, while Jake had stayed, building a life in the town they both once called home. She wondered if he resented her for it, if he ever thought about what could have been. In the days that followed, Sarah found herself running into Jake more often than she expected. It wasn't that the town was small, it was that their lives were somehow intertwined like they had always been. One evening, the town held its annual Christmas festival, a tradition Sarah had almost forgotten. Families gathered in the square, enjoying homemade treats, caroling, and the warmth of community. The scent of pine filled the air, and twinkling lights illuminated the streets. It was a scene straight out of a holiday movie, and yet for Sarah, it was real, a reminder of everything she had left behind. As she walked through the festival, Sarah spotted Jake near a booth, selling handcrafted Christmas ornaments from his woodshop. She hesitated, but something inside her urged her to approach. "Hey," she said, her breath visible in the cold night air. Jake looked up, surprised but not unwelcome. "Hey, Sarah." She admired the ornaments, each one carefully carved and painted. "These are beautiful. You've always been so talented." Jake smiled, a faint blush coloring his cheeks. "Thanks. It's just something I love doing. Keeps me grounded." They talked for a while, reminiscing about old times and catching up on their lives. The awkwardness that had once lingered between them began to fade, replaced by the warmth of familiarity. Jake was still the same in many ways, kind, thoughtful, and deeply connected to the town. But Sarah could see that he had grown too. He was more confident, more sure of himself, and it only made her regret leaving all the more. As the festival went on, Sarah and Jake found themselves working together on one of the town's traditions, decorating the town's Christmas tree. They hadn't planned on it, but somehow they were paired up to hang the ornaments, and the old chemistry between them began to stir. They laughed and joked as they worked, their hands brushing as they passed each other ornaments. There was an ease between them that Sarah hadn't felt in years, and she couldn't help but wonder if coming home had awakened something she thought she had lost. "I missed this," Sarah admitted as they finished, standing back to admire the tree. "I missed all of this." Jake looked at her, his expression soft. "You can always come back, you know." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. Could she really come back? Could she leave her career, her life in New York, for something she wasn't even sure would work out? She wasn't ready to answer that question yet. But as they stood there, side by side, watching the snow fall gently around them, Sarah couldn't deny that something had shifted. The gentle snowfall in Evergreen had blanketed the small town in a thick layer of white, turning every corner into a picturesque winter wonderland. Sarah stood by the window of her childhood home, watching the snowflakes dance softly outside. She sipped her coffee, her thoughts lingering on the previous evening at the Christmas festival with Jake. Every time they talked, it was as if the years apart dissolved, replaced by an unmistakable sense of familiarity and longing. But that longing also came with the weight of unresolved emotions, memories that she had tucked away when she left Evergreen behind. And now, seeing Jake again, working alongside him on the Christmas tree, the ease with which they fell back into old rhythms, it all stirred something inside her, something she wasn't sure she was ready to confront. Her mother, who was recovering slowly, came to sit next to her on the couch. "You've been quiet this morning, sweetheart," she observed gently, her hand resting on Sarah's knee. Sarah smiled faintly, but the concern in her mother's eyes made her pause. "I've just been thinking," she admitted, her voice soft. "About Jake?" her mother asked knowingly. Sarah didn't need to respond. The look on her face said it all. "You know, honey, it was hard for him when you left. I know you had your reasons, and your life in New York has been wonderful, but, well, Jake loved you. Maybe he still does." The truth of her mother's words hit Sarah hard. She had always known that her leaving Evergreen wasn't easy for Jake, but hearing it out loud made the guilt sharper. She had chased her dreams in New York, built a life, a career, and in doing so, she had left behind the boy she once thought she would spend the rest of her life with. At the time, it felt like the right choice, but now, she wasn't so sure. "I don't know if I'm ready for that conversation," Sarah confessed, setting her coffee cup down and running her fingers through her hair. "What if it's too late? What if he's moved on?" Her mother gave her a thoughtful smile, her eyes twinkling with a wisdom that only years of experience could bring. "Sometimes we're given second chances for a reason, and it's never too late if it's meant to be." Sarah let her mother's words sink in, but uncertainty still clung to her heart. The thought of talking to Jake, of opening up old wounds, was both terrifying and exhilarating. What if things had changed too much? What if they hadn't changed at all? Later that day, as Sarah wandered through town, she found herself drawn to Jake's woodshop. She wasn't sure why she was there, but something about the cozy, rustic shop pulled her in. The smell of freshly cut would fill the air, and the warmth of the workshop immediately contrasted the cold winter outside. Jake was busy sanding down a piece of furniture when she stepped inside. He looked up, surprised but not unwelcoming, and wiped his hands on a cloth as he approached her. "Hey," Sarah said, her voice hesitant. "I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to see how things were going." Jake smiled, though there was a guardedness in his eyes. "You're not interrupting. I'm just finishing up here." He glanced around the shop before meeting her gaze again. "It's nice having you back in town, Sarah. It's been a long time." The way he said it, so simply, yet with layers of meaning, made Sarah's chest tighten. She nodded, unsure of what to say, but knowing that she couldn't keep avoiding the topic forever. "Jake," she began, her voice quiet but steady, "I've been thinking a lot about us. About what happened when I left. I'm sorry if I hurt you." He was silent for a moment, his eyes searching hers as if weighing how much of the past he was willing to revisit. "You don't need to apologize, Sarah. We were both young. You had big dreams, and I didn't want to hold you back." "But you did," Sarah admitted, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "You did hold me back, but not in the way you think. I left because I was scared of what staying would mean, scared of settling down when I wasn't ready." Jake's expression softened, and he nodded slowly, his shoulders relaxing as he leaned against the workbench. "I get that. I do. I think deep down I knew you needed to go, and I guess part of me always hoped you'd find your way back." Sarah blinked, taken aback by the raw honesty in his voice. It was as if he had been holding on to that hope for years, quietly waiting for her to return. And now that she had, the weight of it all hung in the air between them. "I don't know if I'm ready to stay," Sarah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm not ready to lose you again either." Jake's eyes softened, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence between them, filled with the unsaid words they had carried for so long. Finally, Jake stepped closer, his hand reaching out to gently touch hers. "Then let's take it one step at a time." In the days that followed, Sarah and Jake began spending more time together, finding themselves drawn to the simple joys of small-town life. They didn't rush into anything, but the tension between them, once filled with uncertainty and guilt, began to ease, replaced by a quiet sense of understanding. One evening, Jake invited Sarah to his family's annual Christmas Eve dinner. The Matthews family had always been close-knit, and their holiday celebrations were legendary in Evergreen, filled with laughter, food, and a warmth that Sarah had missed more than she realized. As they walked toward Jake's house, snow crunching beneath their boots, Sarah found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't felt in years. She glanced up at Jake, who walked beside her, his hands shoved into his pockets to ward off the cold. "Do you remember the last time we walked this way?" Jake asked, breaking the comfortable silence. His tone was light, but Sarah could sense the deeper meaning behind his words. She smiled, her breath visible in the chilly air. "Yeah, I think it was the Christmas before I left for college." "That's right," Jake said, glancing over at her with a soft smile. "You were so excited about leaving for New York. I remember you couldn't stop talking about it." Sarah's smile faltered for a moment, a wave of nostalgia and regret washing over her. "I was," she admitted, "but part of me was scared too. I didn't know what I was walking away from." Jake looked at her, his eyes filled with understanding. "You didn't walk away from anything, Sarah. You just needed to find yourself. And maybe, now that you have, there's room for both." His words hung in the air, and Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. She hadn't realized just how much she had missed Jake. His steady presence, his quiet strength, the way he always seemed to know what she was feeling even before she did. And now, standing here in the snow-covered streets of Evergreen, she realized that Jake had always been a part of her story, even when she was miles away in New York. When they reached Jake's house, the warmth of the Matthews family enveloped her. His parents welcomed her with open arms, and it was as if no time had passed at all. The dinner table was filled with laughter and love, and for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt truly at home. After dinner, as the family gathered around the Christmas tree to exchange gifts, Sarah found herself sitting next to Jake on the couch. Their knees touched, and she felt a warmth spread through her, not just from the fire crackling in the hearth, but from the connection she had with Jake. "Thank you for inviting me," Sarah said softly, her hand resting on his arm. Jake smiled, his gaze never leaving hers. "You're always welcome here, Sarah. Always." They sat in comfortable silence, the sound of Christmas carols playing softly in the background. Sarah couldn't help but think that being here with Jake and his family, was what Christmas was truly about. Not the glitz and glamour of New York, but the quiet, simple moments of love and connection. As the night wore on, Sarah realized that she didn't want to leave. Not just the dinner or the warmth of Jake's family, but Evergreen itself. She had spent so long running away from her past, from the life she thought she didn't want, only to realize that maybe, just maybe, this was where she was meant to be all along. Christmas morning dawned bright and clear, the sun reflecting off the fresh snow that had fallen overnight. Sarah woke up early, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. She stretched in bed, listening to the quiet sounds of her childhood home, the faint rustling of her parents downstairs, the smell of fresh coffee brewing, and the soft hum of holiday music playing in the background. As she padded downstairs, she found her father sitting by the tree, a cup of coffee in his hand and a contented smile on his face. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart," he said, looking up as she entered the room. "Merry Christmas, Dad," Sarah replied, sitting down beside him on the couch. They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, watching the twinkling lights on the tree. It was a scene straight out of Sarah's childhood, one that brought back a flood of memories. "I'm glad you're home," her father said after a while, his voice soft. "It feels right having you here." Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. "It feels right to be here." Later that morning, as they exchanged gifts, Sarah's thoughts kept drifting back to Jake. She wondered if he was thinking of her too, if the same feelings of nostalgia and longing were swirling around in his mind. After breakfast, Sarah bundled up and decided to take a walk through town. The streets were quiet, save for a few families heading to church, and the snow crunched beneath her boots as she walked. As she approached Jake's woodshop, she saw him standing outside, hands shoved in his pockets, watching the snow fall. "Hey," she called out, her breath visible in the cold air. Jake looked up, a smile spreading across his face. "Hey, Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas," Sarah replied, her heart beating faster as she approached him. They stood there for a moment, the cold air swirling around them, but Sarah didn't feel the chill. All she felt was the warmth of Jake's presence, the undeniable connection that had always been between them. "I've been thinking," Sarah began, her voice soft, "about everything, about us." Jake's expression softened, and he took a step closer. "I have too." Sarah took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. "I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if I'm ready to leave New York for good, but I do know that I don't want to lose you again." Jake's eyes searched hers, and for a moment, she thought he might say something, but instead, he reached out and took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "You won't lose me," he said softly. "I'm not going anywhere." And in that moment, Sarah knew that no matter what happened, no matter where life took her, Jake would always be a part of her story. He was her home, her heart, and this Christmas in Evergreen was just the beginning. As they stood there, hand in hand, watching the snow fall gently around them, Sarah realized that sometimes coming home wasn't about a place. It was about finding the people who made you feel like you belonged. And with Jake by her side, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. Hope you enjoyed this story. Don't forget to like it and subscribe to our channel. Your participation is essential so that we can continue to bring you more incredible stories. Share it with your friends to help our channel grow. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.